From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. It is Saturday, March the 8th, 2025. We're in Victoria, British Columbia. My name is Jack Etkin. I'm coming to you with Norm Ryder. This show is called Citizens Forum. It's hopefully a Canadian perspective on what's going on locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally, with an underlying theme of, is Canada the great democracy that they always tell us it is? And do we have the free press that they tell us we have? And are those things even important? So I want to talk a little bit about the whole situation with Russia and Ukraine.
The operation is now underway in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine has declared a state.
The official story we're told is, of course, that we all know, that Russia is a great enemy, that we have to spend more on the military because Russia is a threat to us and so is China. But my question is that story true? Can we believe it just because we're being told it by the media and by the politicians? Because a lot of people say we don't really trust the media and we don't really trust the politicians. But they're the ones telling us this story of Russia as the enemy, and we do believe them. And millions and millions of Canadians do believe them and do trust them. And I myself used to believe and trust what I was told by the media and the government. I mean, for many, many decades at the beginning of my life, I basically thought they were telling us the truth. They were doing their best for us. But now I think it's our own leadership that we really have to fear. And when I talk about our own leadership, I don't mean the governments. I mean the giant corporations and the 0.01% elite, if I can call them that, the extreme wealthy and powerful families who I think really run Canada. So, and I think they are the ones telling us that we have these outside enemies that we have to focus on. So if we choose to look at the story of Russia-Ukraine over the past 10 or 12 years, and then, of course, the last 3 years, I guess, of the war, I mean, the story is that Russia is expansionist, Russia is a threat, and that's what we get. But because I stopped believing and trusting the media and the government some years ago, when they tell me these stories, I no longer believe them. Now, the stories may be true, but I'm not going to believe the story just because they tell me the story. So we start to look for other information. And when you start to look for other information, you find that there are experts who are at the same level as the experts we always see and hear in the corporate media. But there are other experts who tell us a very different story. They say that promises were made to Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed, that NATO would not move eastward. Russia even said they would join NATO because they didn't want to be the enemy. They wanted to be the friend. They wanted to be in business with everybody else. They have a lot to offer. They're like Canada, a storehouse of all these wonderful natural resources that we're destroying in order to live the lives that we live. But Russia has them, right? And they wanted to be part of the game. Or so the story goes. And when I say experts, I mean politicians, journalists, diplomats, former US military, former CIA, journalists who are not part of the corporate establishment, some politicians, but we don't get to hear them because the media and our governments only tell us the official story. And that, I think, is dangerous for us, because if we trust and believe, for example, the media, and the media is owned by large corporations who are not our friends, And they are telling us a story. And if we believe them, then that really gives them a lot of power and control over us. And that's dangerous for us because these people are not our friends. I mean, the journalists on radio, television, and the newspapers and everywhere else online, the corporate media, their number one story is that they are working for us. They are our friends, but they're not working for us. I mean, that's factually correct. They're working for a large corporation. And that's even sadly true of the CBC, which we pay, but they still don't work for us. They're still working for big business, or so I think. So it's a dangerous thing to trust and believe the media when the media is working for large corporations, and in my opinion is just kind of their propaganda machine. And again, that's not to say that the story they're telling us is false, but it is to raise the question of why are all the experts who disagree with the official story never mentioned? Why can't we Canadians hear that part of the facts and the truth? And that's what I want to say about the situation in Canada. And it's not only on Russia, Ukraine, it's on many, many, many important issues. Because, the media tells us a story and so do the politicians. And the biggest part of that story is they're working for us. But are they really? And are we sure we want to trust them?
Well, Jack, by these experts you're talking about, are they these talking heads we see both on the mainstream media and the alternate media?
Well, definitely the mainstream media.
Well, people like us, the talking heads. But
Yeah.
seriously, when it comes to the issue between Russia and Ukraine, when it started 3 years ago, I couldn't figure out who the bad guy was. I listened to some of the mainstream media about it, read about it. Okay, that's one take. Looked around at the alternate and got more information. And after 3 years, I've come to the conclusion I still don't know what's going on there. But when we talk about a country, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, or another one that we haven't mentioned so far, China, about how terrible they are, how they are the enemy, etc. We have to remember it's not necessarily the people, probably isn't the people, it's the government, and whether it's a democracy or not, there's that power elite that is controlling, calling the shot. And when you hear someone say, I don't like a particular country because of the, shall we say, naughty things they're doing, I'll lay odds on it, 9 times out of 10, it's not the people that are supporting it. They're just pushed into it, possibly under the variant of propaganda that they're fed by their version of mainstream media.
Yeah.
So I was going to say that anything you see on the news, even the alternate news, I mean, I've seen some rather entertaining stories there too. You've got to go out and make sure you get the information from probably 2 or 3 sources that should at least have some form of credibility, and before you can even come close to figuring what's going on.
Yeah, which moves us on to the next topic of tariffs, which is, another big one.
Once again, this is a really confusing situation because I think Trump's main idea with the tariffs is to keep everyone under control and bouncing and speculating, and he's got the whole world paying attention to him. What's the state of the the tariffs against Canada now? Now, you'll tell me one thing, but I'll ask you, did you look at the news the last 5 minutes? Trump might have said something totally different. But even people I know of that will claim, oh, he's doing the right thing with the tariffs. They admit that this on again, off again is probably doing more harm than either bringing the tariffs in or not, depending on your perspective, that it's designed to keep everyone on edge, and I can't see any good coming out of the way he's using the tariffs as a weapon against people to keep making sure he's got center stage.
Yeah, and here in British Columbia, virtually the first thing that happened when President Trump introduced the tariffs several weeks ago was that our premier, NDP premier David Eby, said right off the bat, he said, well, because of these tariffs, we can no longer have any environmental reviews of LNG projects and pipelines and logging and mining. We don't have time for any of that because of these tariffs. We've got to get to work, right? So we see the corporate dream of no processes at all. They can just go ahead and do what they want. And we're being told as Canadians and as Canada, yes, that's what we have to do because we don't, it's time for big changes. We've got to, and it seems on a larger scale also that the United States is kind of being removed as the number one power in the world. It's being perhaps to some extent sidetracked. Canada now, we're told, we have to start looking for other markets. And I assume those other markets will be in Asia for all the natural resource wealth that Canada is being stripped of, is now going to flow, I assume, to Asia and not to the United States. That seems to be the direction we're going right now. And I assume that's the plan because it's time for the United States to step aside, just like the British Empire. Their time was over and they disappeared as the number one power.
Yeah, that's exactly. No, I think Europe is still slated for a lot of resources too. The west of Canada, the resources go west to the Far East, I guess you could say, which gets confusing. But the U.S., for a number of reasons, same way that the Brits collapsed, basically their empire collapsed after World War I. And the Americans, it hasn't been so fast, but they really started their decline in the Vietnam War era. And it's pretty much a standard thing that in a war, your best and your brightest leading people into battle are the first ones killed. And I'm pretty sure that's losing the, shall we say, competent ruling class in Great Britain was what killed off the empire. And the Americans, with their constant war, have succeeded in depleting the ones that are really capable of proper leadership.
Plus the massive amounts of money that are spent.
Well, I was going to say the other thing is that to a limited extent in the First World War and certainly in the Second World War, the Americans had the massive industrial power, and they were important in whatever side was winning the war, their weight, their ability to do things. They don't have that industrial power now, but they still have the mentality, almost as though they're still all, shall we say, John Wayne's, that they can go around and bully the world and force us to think the way they want to for their benefit. That my feeling, the best way to deal with Trump would have been just to say, okay, you put the tariffs on, and then just everyone quietly go back, deal with things they want to, and ignore him, basically isolate him. But you talked about David Eby saying that we have to do away with environmental reviews. Well, it's not really him. That was across the country. All the premiers were saying that. That, yes, playing into the hands of the corporations, but, well, it could be by plan. But the other thing is, were they just jumping in on never let a good crisis go to waste and taking the opportunity to push it through? So, as a country, we needed a unified stance. I'm just not convinced what we're doing is the right unified stance, but at least that's one good thing Trump's done. He's unified Canadians.
Yeah, and here's a story from CBC Today, which is the March 8th, or maybe yesterday. Rebooting Canada's backbone. Trump's tariffs put mega projects back in spotlight. So now they're telling us we have to build from pipelines to ports. Experts urge Canada to build big to reduce dependence on the United States. So, in other words, we, the Canadian people, are going to go even more deeply into debt to build all these new projects to allow our resources to be shipped to new countries because the United States is now out, and we can't afford to go into debt anymore. And then we can't afford to continue to destroy the environment either. So, maybe it's time to have a new way of looking at it. And I want to talk a little bit about the subject of democracy and ask the question, is democracy important to us? Do we want a better democracy in Canada? And what would a better democracy mean in terms of our lives and, our communities? And I think if we look at things like the healthcare crisis, well, did we ever, speaking of democracy, did we ever vote to not have a doctor? And did we vote to be sitting, bleeding and in pain, which happened to somebody I know very recently, for I think it was close to 10 hours in an emergency room? Did we vote for that you'd have to sit for 10 hours in an emergency room to get very good treatment when he got it, but 10-hour wait? Other countries don't have that. Why do we? And I think the problem with our healthcare system is that our health and is not the number one priority in our healthcare system. I think the number one priority in our healthcare system is corporate profit. And I think if we could the numbers are never talked about, but I've looked at the numbers a little bit. And I think if you look at the numbers, you will see that our system is hugely expensive. And where is that money going? A lot of it is going to corporate profit. I mean, the hospitals are tremendously high tech. The whole system is high tech, pharmaceutical based. The labs, all the testing labs, which used to be publicly run, have now been privatized. Food services in the hospital has been privatized. So more and more is being privatized. We're never told the numbers, so we don't know if that's saving us money or not. But we do know that a lot of money is going to corporate profit. Why don't we as Canadians and as Canada have a real look, not done by the government because we can't trust the government, and not done by the media because we can't trust the media. But why can't we in some way, if we're this great democracy, have a real look at what caused this disaster and how we can fix it? For example, here in BC, I think we have 1 million people out of 5 million, 1 million people who don't have a doctor, something like that. Well, 1 million people without a doctor is only about 700 doctors, because the average doctor has a patient load of 1,000 to 1,500 people is not uncommon. So 700 more doctors in BC would give us the coverage we need for the 1 million people who don't have a doctor, right? We've had this problem getting worse and worse and worse for 20 years. So over 20 years, we've not been able to create, let's say, an extra 35 doctors a year to give us the 700 we need to solve the problem. I mean, look at what the government did with COVID. They completely changed the entire country. Look at what they're doing with the tariffs, right? Literally overnight, we imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of US products coming in. But we can't find a way to give us 35 extra doctors a year for the past 20 years. And in fact, those doctors are here right now, many of them foreign trained, who were told they could come into Canada and practice, but when they get here, they find they can't. They're driving cabs and delivering food. Now, if they can't do the job, okay, they can't do the job. But if they can do the job, why? I spoke to a foreign trained doctor just a few months ago, he said he practiced, I don't know where he was from or where he was trained, but he practiced in New York State for several years. He was licensed in 4 or 5 American states, moved to Canada, practiced in Manitoba, but could not get into BC until very, very recently. So, I mean, why isn't that being discussed? And where, I think there are solutions, and I think if we had more of a democracy, we would be finding those solutions because we want the solutions. But our governments don't necessarily work for what we want. They are very, I would say, tightly controlled by corporate Canada and by the 0.01%. And our health is not at the top of their list of what's important. At the top of their list of what's important is their own wealth and their own power. And that seems to be increasing. While, here, we can't find a doctor. We can't, I know families whose adult children can't move out because they can't afford to rent or buy a place. Well, I mean, that's brand new in Canada. That was never a problem before. Why do we have the problem now? And where is the money flowing if people can't afford the rent, and people who do rent are paying huge rents, and people who buy are paying huge mortgages, but somehow we can't do anything about it. So there's a real question, do we have a democracy in Canada? And that, I think, is something we should at least begin to talk about. Are we getting what we want? Who do our governments really work for? Who does the media work for? And can we start to fix this up if we want to? Because right now, from what I can see, democracy is not top of the list in Canada as an issue of concern, but I think it should be. And I think we'd all be a lot better off if we did think about and talk about democracy more.
Well, Jack, in answer to your question, do we have a democracy in Canada? No.
Yeah.
But I certainly saw that this week at a public hearing on a rezoning that on the surface it sounded like a good idea, but you could see that the council had no intention of listening to the people that were putting forward good suggestions, good concerns about safety that could be included in the project. I just looked at the report from the municipal staff. None of the safety recommendations are considered. It's the rubber stamp came out and approved it, even though the project is not going to accomplish what they say it's going to. But we should walk it back a little bit from looking at democracy. Shouldn't we start at the beginning? What type of country do we want? That way, there's so many things, and I've never felt the government at any time has been interested in what I as a citizen want in this country. It's always them telling me what I want, and well, if you don't like that, we'll ignore you. That you keep, for other issues, bringing up the idea of the citizens' assemblies. And maybe it's time that we, the people, started congregating together and instructing the government. And this is not a political issue because all the parties they don't care about democracy. They do what they feel like. And they're pretty much a very common theme if you look deeper at most of the parties. But you mentioned the bit about healthcare. Well, if you were in the States, your friend would not have been probably sitting in the emergency room unless he had the appropriate insurance. At least he had a place to sit. He was better off here. But we've got such a hybrid system between it's also lower cost than the American system and, shall we say, just picking Sweden, which is a fully, properly socialized medical care. So this all comes into what do we want? And it's about time we really seriously looked at what is Canada, where is Canada going? And it's not just Canada, I'd say virtually every country in the world should sit down and think about just what do they want just in their country for the world that we're marching off track somewhere, collectively, everywhere.
Yeah, and it's hard to know even where to start, because when our governments and politicians are basically gone from us, and the media is gone from us, and there's no real national organizations, like, for example, the Council of Canadians, or on the other side, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which is a corporate funded organization. I mean, that represents sort of the left and sort of the right. They're not interested in this kind of thing. So
Well, I was going to say that we shouldn't be waiting for an organization to come forward to do it. We've got to do it as a grassroots push forward. It'll be chaotic for a while while we're getting things going, that your group's going to be talking about different things and looking differently than my group will. But out of chaos like that, we can actually come to a conclusion. It may take a few years. You and I may not even see it accomplished. But somewhere along the line, we have to take back the governance of our lives, of our country, of everything, from the elected politicians who are not there to serve us. There, as you pointed out, they're there to serve the corporate masters, or, well, who knows who's above them controlling the whole shot.
You mentioned citizens' assemblies, and I think that's a citizens' assembly is a very good way of starting it out, but it would have to be something that had the clout to be seen and heard around the country. A citizens' assembly is just a group of citizens brought together, to average citizens brought together.
If you're looking at an organized problem, if you're looking at, you say it has to be an organized group. Once you get into that, then you're back under control of the system. It has to be truly just the grassroots of people coming together and deciding what has to be done.
Yep.
As I say, it'd be a slow process, but it's the only way to do it.
Okay. We're going to move on to some sort of the issues of the day, or something along that line. And hopefully we'll be able to show a little bit how the issues are always tied into these same problems of do we have a democracy? Who runs the country? What about the media? So number one, I don't know if you have any, Norm, but I've got a few.
Well, actually, I do have one that can come up quite nicely on that.
Start right off with it.
Well, I think it's a good one to start off with. Actually, we're not going to do the topic justice today, but it's Technocracy. Technocracy Inc. was a organization that came to the forefront in 1930, but it's coming back now, and the Musk connections to Technocracy, that's part of what I have to explore a little more. It's quite an interesting thing, that the couple of fundamental principles of Technocracy we'll get the scientists, engineers, the various experts will make all the decisions. They'll have all the facts, they can make all the decisions. Well, who defines what the fact is? And we've experienced that the last few years. Facts definitely depends on who's talking about them. But another thing was that everything will be taxed or be priced in terms of the cost of energy to produce it. And we are moving towards that with the carbon tax. That I don't think they're quite doing it right there, but it's approaching that. But one article I saw that came up that just sort of reminded me of this whole thing, and I'll just bring it up on a share screen. I won't go into the depth of the article itself. Whoops. Now, one of the things that Musk, it's not Trump really, it's Musk is doing is dismantling the Department of Education in the States and streamlining it with education, or what it says, ed technocracy. Now, just, whoops. That one of the things in technocracy is the Technocracy 2, I think we should talk about, which is what we have now, that they want to do things more with robots, more that type of thing. And in a sense, shall we say, it'd be a good idea if we do all education. It's all done online on screen, and one teacher, or better yet, we'll just have a robot. You have one English teacher for the entire US or Canada, or maybe both of us, we can combine on that. That'd give you good education, wouldn't it, Jack? Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, right. In theory, on paper, that looks great. You'll be able to save costs and not have to pay for the teachers. But there's a lot more to teaching than just some cute bunny or whatever you want your robot to look like standing up in front of a screen telling people what to do. Well, that's where this whole idea of technocracy falls down. And that's only one example. We can go through all sorts of things where the Silicon Valley, which of course great proponents of technocracy, of which Musk is quite closely tied in, as well as his friends like Thiel and quite a few others, where if we allow them to do that, we're going to lose basically the whole soul and humanity of the people. And there will be no democracy because everything will be decided by AI. Everything will be controlled by AI, and that's very much the direction they're going.
Yeah, it's definitely strange directions the world is going in these days. End of the show. Last topic. Who do you think is going to win the Liberal nomination for Prime Minister race, which is happening tomorrow? And then who is going to win the federal election that should be taking place fairly soon?
Well, I think the script from the deep state is for Carney to win. After all, he's a good choice. He's a former Goldman Sachs banker, been governor of the Bank of Canada in England as well. So he's got good qualifications to prove that he will do what they want. And the script definitely appears to be written in his direction. Of course, mind you, with chaos going on in the world, who knows who they're going to put in.
Yeah. And then who's going to win the election? Which party?
Up until 3 weeks ago, I think everyone has said the Conservative Party. Now they've got it in a state of flux, which of course is what they want. Good chance the Liberals will win, especially if Carney gets in, that they've been able to market him as quite the savior. But it doesn't really matter who wins the election because it'll be the same deep state calling the shot. I'll just swing that back here locally, that I think John Rustad of the Conservatives losing he's lost 3 MLAs in the last 2 days.
Yeah, this is our provincial government you're talking about now.
That's right. He's lost that. A lot of that, I think, is because of choices and pressures he's had from the deep state. Now, not whether he made the right choice or not, and it started it off is not important. I think he's very much pressured by the deep state, and whoever gets in after him will be a deep state lackey, if you want. And then you can turn around and look at the NDP party, which I'm quite convinced is that a deep state lackey is running the show there. So ultimately...
And the NDP is our provincial government here in BC.
Yeah. Federally, it
doesn't matter.
The one that the deep state likes the best and will read the script best. And I guess I should say a little bit about Trudeau, that a lot of people look at me strangely when I say this until they think, Trudeau's done a wonderful job. I mean, he's been trained as an actor. He's acted the role of prime minister most of the time. He's read his scripts properly. The thing is, the scripts haven't been written to do any good for the people. In the same vein, people look at me strangely when I say the best president the U.S. ever had was Martin Sheen, followed by Ronald Reagan. That both of them could read their lines quite well. And with Martin Sheen, of course, you could chuckle about it on that show, The West Wing, which is a very well done show, no matter what your political view was. But the leaders of any of the provinces, countries, etc., I'm quite convinced the biggest skill, if you want to be a leader of any of them now, is do what Trudeau did and take acting, learn how to act well.
So I would agree. I think Carney is going to win the Liberal leadership race. I think there'll be a federal election very quickly. And I agree, it doesn't matter which party wins. The agenda, the corporate agenda, is the one that's going to be followed basically by either party. And I don't think we're heading into great and prosperous times. That's today's show. Thanks very much for watching, folks. Thank you, Norm.
Well, I was going to say, Jack, I wish I could have disagreed with what you just said.
Thanks, everybody, for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.